Well, thank you for coming and listening to me. And you might wonder what a guy all steel is doing in a gold conference. It's not all gold, it's all steel. There's a bit of a background to that. See, I'm not actually a born Montrealer. I was born in Budapest, Hungary, and I'm a refugee from Hungary, left in 1956 with my parents. So having been there, living there till I was 9, I got exposed to socialism, to the hyperinflation. At least my father went through the hyperinflation in Hungary. And when we escaped Hungary, through the border, 1956, it wasn't paper money that bought the guides or the border guards. It was gold watches. So there's a bit of a start there. But this was sort of put on hold for many years. And my father started a company building metal forming machines. That's where the all-steel thing comes in. And over the years, the family business grew and prospered, did quite well, until 10, 15 years ago. And my father was getting kind of old, and I was taking over running the business. But it was no longer as profitable. In its prime, the best years we did $12 million business, had over 80 employees on the payroll. Things were sweet. And then we started to lose money. And I didn't understand why. We were doing the same thing we did before. We were losing money. And my father passed on. Unfortunately, my mom was there. And both of us ran the company for a year or two, still losing money. So it was no longer just a cyclical problem, which had happened before. It never came back. So when my mom passed, I was the one left with the unpleasant duty of shutting the company down. That is to say, the manufacturing arm, Ferro Products in Montreal, which build these machines. If you go to allsteel.com, you'll see we're still in business. Machines are built in China. Guess what? So here I was in my 50s, and I was kind of like, what do I do now? Start a new career? This is going down. I don't understand. I better learn investments, and I still had some money left. So, stocks, real estate, dabbled here, dabbled there. None of this was making much sense. So I said, well, there must be something more to this. Oh, economics. Economics underlies all this, the study of money and capital flows, and why is China winning? Is it cheap labor? Well, if cheap labor was the thing, Haiti would be winning. So that's not right. And so I looked at economics, and they call it the dismal science. I wonder why. Maybe because a lot of the stuff in conventional economics is actually not true. It's not really a science. And the Black-Scholes model and Nobel laureates, they ran LTCM, long-term capital investment, Nobel laureates. They lost hundreds of billions of dollars, so much money that the Fed had to step in and prevent a financial collapse. Didn't make sense. And then I saw this thing called Austrian economics going on the web and so on. And based on that, Mises was one of the guys, and there's a von Mises Institute. Ludwig von Mises, who was arguably the greatest economist of the 20th century, wrote a great book called Human Action. So what does that have to do with economics? Well, everything. It's not the equations, the partial differential equations and the mathematical calculations and all this. It's human beings making decisions. When Jane walks into the store with $10 in her pocket and decides to buy 6 oranges or 10 apples, why? Well, she had a value scale, and she figured that at that moment those 6 oranges were worth more than the $10 and so on. On the other side, the merchant said, no, the $10 are worth more to me than the 6 oranges. So 6 oranges and $10 change hands. Nothing has really changed. There's still the same stuff in the world. So has value been added by this trade? Of course, both people had their value scales enhanced. And that's the fundamental beginning of Austrian economics. The root. Henry Thoreau said, for every 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, there's one hacking at the root. So I like to find my way to the root. It's very simple. Make the trade, not make the trade. End of story. And built on this, you can get into all the complexities you want with interest rates and bonds and equities and so on. It all starts there. So I studied this Austrian economics. I bought the big book, the tome, 1,000-some-odd pages by Mises. And I became a bit of, a groupie. So this is it. I've got it. I understand it now. I know what value is. And of course, this is not trivial because a guy called Marx didn't understand what value was. He thought value came from labor. And of course, that's not true because labor can be misplaced and value can be lost rather than gained. If you can spend as much time as you want making a mud pie, it's still a mud pie. In fact, somebody did a calculation on the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. Their input, crude oil, coal, iron ore, all this stuff was worth more in a free market than all the products they made. A lot of cars. So can you imagine? And of course, Marx, in his mistaken belief, said, well, if labor adds value, how come the capitalist is making money? Oh, he's exploiting labor. And if he's exploiting labor, we have to get rid of him. And so 100 million people were murdered in the 20th century because of one false economic assumption. Keynes made a similar false assumption with respect to the circulation of money. And of course, we all know we're paying the price right now. So I took this Austrian economics pretty seriously. Then I was browsing and I saw this thing, Fekete, Professor Fekete writing about economics. And Fekete, he's a Hungarian guy. I was born in Hungary, as I told you. And he was a confrere, I guess. So I started to read some of his things, very interesting. And then one day I read something, he criticized Mises. Criticized Mises? How could he do that? That crazy Hungarian nut. I got to read more about this and kind of debunk it. So I'm reading and he says, well, on page 436 of Human Action, Mises said, quote, a fully mature claim against gold is as good as gold, end of quote. And I said, you got to be kidding. So I came out of Hungary not with claims against gold, but with a gold watch. The American pilots have a gold coin in their survival kit, not a piece of paper. This can't be right. So I pulled the book off my shelf. I had it. Page 436, sure enough, there was the quote. Well, Professor Fekete must know what he's talking about. Now it was no longer the crazy Hungarian. So I gathered all the information he had on the internet, read it all, studied it, and some of it was kind of strange. He starts talking a little story about the real bills doctrine of Adam Smith, and so what has this got to do with gold standard and gold? I said, well, okay, I trust him, I believe him, I'm going to read it, study it.
And they came out for a 2-minute break.
So I did.
They've gone back in.
And then I read all this stuff, there was nothing left.
Half an hour and then we'll have morning.
There must be more. There's Economics 101, where's 102? An announcement came on that there was a thing called Gold Standard University Live. Professor Fekete was giving a talk in Hungary, and I joined. And the first session, there were 7 of us sitting around listening to him talk, and it was amazing to listen to the man. And after a while, I made a commitment to help preserve and disseminate the information he had. It was much too valuable to be lost. He was closer to the gold standard than I was. I was, a generation removed more or less. But I do remember my father, the gleam in my father's eyes when he talked about the peaceable days. The peaceable days. He meant before World War I, before the Great War, when the world was on that barbarous relic, the gold standard. So, after this commitment, went back again, met a chapter from Australia, a good friend of Marcus, name's Philip Barton. And we got to talking at this thing, and he said, Rudy, what is he talking about? I didn't understand what he said, meaning the professor. And of course, I had studied all his stuff, so I knew what he was talking about, and I explained it to him, and I kind of expanded it out, easier to understand, took the professor's very, erudite language into more common, earthy stuff, and thank you, and this happened a few times. And later on, when the session was over, he sent me an email with another question, and it happened to be, how does this work again? How do falling interest rates destroy capital? And nobody understood this, so I explained it to him. The liquidation cost of the capital goes up as the interest rates go down. Everybody thinks that low interest rates are good. That may be true, but falling interest rates are a different story altogether. They're very lethal. So I explained it to him in writing. Thank you, can I use this for other people? to explain it to them, because they're all asking me this. Yes, yes, yes. Long story short, he formed a thing called the Gold Standard Institute to carry on this work to gather, preserve, and disseminate information about how things were and how they could be and should be, and so on and so forth. And I made a further commitment beyond Professor Fekete to work with this institute. I was the editor-in-chief for a while. Now I'm the president. I got co-opted. Philip had to quit. So that brings us up to date. This is my old career. In a way, it's still there. I'll still makes machines, but it's certainly not $12 million a year. No 80 employees. Now I'm here about gold. So you already heard a couple of interesting things. I flew in from Montreal, and it's brutal. It's 5 hours from Montreal to Vancouver, 3 hours waiting in the airport, 15 hours on this airplane from Vancouver. I got a sore butt, but I had plenty of time to think. I was thinking, here I am in this enormous airplane, Boeing 777, and it's flying along. It's getting 380 or 400 people and enough fuel for 15 hours, 7,000 miles, whatever. Hundreds of thousands of pounds. By golly, when it lands, this landing gear, this big chunk of titanium takes this enormous stress. Wow. And somebody comes along and says, titanium, that's so expensive. You got to find it, the ores, you've got to dig it out of the ground, separate the dirt, refine it, pour it into ingots, forge it, machine it. Why don't we make it out of paper? And just say the full faith and credit of the Boeing Corporation is behind this landing gear. Well, you're all laughing. But isn't the same thing about gold true? So hard to find, a barbarous relic, expensive, dig it out of the ground, melt it down, pour it into ingots, crunch it into, why bother? Well, full faith and credit of the U.S. government's behind it, or whatever government, so what? Now, the outline of this, my speak, is an alternative monetary system. You've got to be a little bit careful with this. It's more or less not just a bunch of choices out there. Pick one of many and see which one works. There is one monetary system that works and others that don't. And the question is, how far away are you from the one? If somebody says 2 + 2 is 4, yeah, figure that out. That's the truth. But if you don't tell the truth, what is it? Is it 5? Is it 3? Is it 6? Forget it. There's endless varieties of twists and lies and so on. So I'd like to talk about this. There's only one. And it's based on positive values. Now this is very important. You already saw a little bit of the history of the dollar when it was kind of a convenience thing to not carry the coins, but you sort of carry the paper, which is redeemable in gold, in money. To me, gold is money. Well, not to me. J.P. Morgan said this. He said, gold is money, everything else is credit. You do understand credit. Credit is an exchange at the most fundamental level. It's an exchange of present good for future good. Present good being, let's say I borrow a pound of sugar from my neighbor. There's a pound of sugar, even IOU. The IOU is a promise. It's a future good. And when I pay back the pound of sugar, the IOU gets cleaned away. It gets wiped out. Now, if I don't pay back the sugar, I forgot to buy sugar. Go see Jane. She's got some sugar. She'll lend it to you. She'll give it back to you, and I'll owe it to her. So they swap the IOU. Now I owe the money, the sugar, to Jane, and the other guy who borrowed, he's fine. So the payment, if you will, was transferred. Now somebody said, I don't know the name of the man who made this quote, but he said, money and credit are worlds apart. They're like fire and water. Water extinguishes fire. Money extinguishes credit. So when I pay back that pound of sugar, done. If I don't pay it back, somebody else pays it back, credit is still there. And you understand what I'm talking about. If you buy a TV set with cash, hopefully, theoretically, the credit is gone. If you buy it on a credit card, it's transferred to the Visa company and it still has to be paid. But does this paper money actually extinguish debt? That's the key question. The definition of money is that which extinguishes all debt. Extinguishes, not transfers. Well, where does the money come from? It's issued by a bank, a Federal Reserve, whatever, and it's a liability to them. And the assets, so-called asset on their books, are more debt, treasury bonds, and so on. So when you pay a bill with paper or plastic, that debt is not extinguished, it's transferred. And this is kind of trivial if you talk about a pound of sugar, but you talk about $1 trillion worth of money in China sitting there paying for goods. The debt has not been extinguished, it's sitting there. Gold extinguishes debt, and that's why gold is money. Now, the purpose of gold or money is as a means of exchange, store of value. Store of value, some people don't think that's important, but it's very important. Just as indirect trade or barter, or rather direct trade barter, grows into indirect trade when money comes on the scene, so people no longer trade, commodity for commodity, eggs for fish. They trade for money and then use the money to get the stuff they really want. Same thing happens with the value store property of money. People can hoard money for their old age, whatever they want. They don't have to hoard sugar and salt and flour and bread and all this stuff. They just hoard money. So it makes the world economy more efficient. Paper money is not a very good, paper legal tender is not a very good store of value. And it's not even good to extinguish all debt. When I came to Australia, I had to exchange some dollars, and I know the Australian dollars are almost at par. But nevertheless, I had to pay $80 US for $60 Australian. A little bit of a gouge at the airport. What are you going to do? Gold is gold. So positive values. Now, we also talked about this fiduciary component, and we talk about the 19th century, the old gold standard. And I think Dan said he's not sure we can go back to that, and we don't really want to go back to that. We want to do better than that. Because one of the problems with that gold standard was exactly between the fiat currency and the real money, there was this fiduciary or promises. And of course, promises are subject to stretching. Gold is not. Gold is gold. Yeah, you can dilute it, but that's easy enough to detect. I mean, this is fraudulent and it's very straightforward. But the other stuff is a little bit more obscure. So if you have no fiduciary component in your gold standard, no promises, only stuff that's actually doable. I don't know if you read the news, probably you do. Mervyn King, the head of the English Central Bank, just came out and said, this Basel II is really a bunch of poppycock. I mean, who cares if your capital has grown from 2% to 4%? Every bank should be prepared for the worst case scenario. In other words, a full run on the bank, everybody wants their money out, and the banks should say, no problem, here it is. No problem, here it is. And that's very possible. I'd like to read another quote here. This is Hans Sennholz. He's an Austrian economist. He says, sound money and free banking are not impossible. They are merely illegal. That is why money must be deregulated. The gold standard will return as soon as people realize that honesty is the best policy. As hope of ill gain is the beginning of the fiat standard, so is honesty the mother of the gold standard. The gold standard is as old as civilization. Throughout the ages, the gold standard has emerged again and again because man needed a dependable medium of exchange. So, now here's another guy. You must know him, Mr. Greenspan. I don't know if you've heard this one. In 1966, he said this, quote, abandonment of the gold standard made it possible for the welfare statists to use the banking system as a means to an unlimited expansion of credit. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value, as was done in the case of gold. The financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for the owners of wealth to protect themselves. This is the shabby secret of the welfare statist tirades against gold. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the hidden confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. And he said this, and yet, when he was in the seat, he was printing mile a minute. Liquidity flows. It's strange. And you guys all laughed when I said, papier-mâché landing gear. Well, why? Well, one reason, I think, is because the laws of gravity are pretty obvious. Drop the ball, boom, instant response. You cut the gold chain that Mr. Nixon did, 40 years have passed. So maybe cause and effect are a little bit far apart to see. But what about Marx and Keynes and all these guys? I think they forgot one important thing, that human beings are subject to natural law. And human nature is part of natural law. And when Mr. Greenspan also said, he said, well, we could run a dollar standard just as well as if it was gold. All we have to do is the same thing. So paper is the same as gold as long as we do the same thing? No, I don't think so. Because it ignores human nature. Dan said it well. He said governments will inflate if they can. People just do what they do. So whatever system we have has to take cognizance of human nature, the frailties and the problems, as well as the miraculous and some of the wonderful things people have done. You can't separate this out. You have to understand that the system itself must be invulnerable, otherwise people will game the system. Now, I made money, this company made nice money over many years, then it started to lose some. Well, right now I'm making a lot more money speculating in gold and futures and whatnot than this company ever did, or does. It's kind of silly. And I think Dan put it well also. He said, how did they make money under the gold standard? By doing stuff, making stuff the consumers wanted, bending their minds to building a better mousetrap, building a better car, a Henry Ford, the railroads, whatever, Orville Wright. Today it's, how can you game the system? Well, how can we take an advantage? How can we reduce our taxes? And all the attention is going in the wrong direction. The whole system is corrupt, and it's time for it to fall. And all we can do here individually is protect ourselves and our own families as much as we can, and perhaps spread the word. There's another statement out there that says, the pen is mightier than the sword. Well, that sounds kind of silly, a guy with a pen and somebody else with a sword fighting it out. Well, of course that's not the way it works. The one who points the gun is driven by ideas. And when Stalin caused the death of 14 million Ukrainians, it was the ideas that did it. And when Hitler took over, democratically voted into power, it was ideas that did it. And when the idea comes around that we got to get rid of all this corruption and all this paper printing and replace it with something honest and proper, gold will become recognized as what it is, money. Now, all the work I've done with Professor Fekete, he's a monetary scientist, so talk and all this thing doesn't cut it. Prove it. Prove to me that gold is money. It's not in circulation. You can't go and buy bread with it. Well, okay. There's a thing called stock to flows ratio in commodities. Stock means how much there is at hand, the pile, the inventory. And flows is primary production. For example, crude oil. Some people say crude oil should back money or back currency. Well, the stock to flows of crude oil is 60, 90 days. The U.S. strategic oil supply is what, 90, 120 days, so on. Copper, measured in days. Platinum, precious metal, days or weeks. Palladium, weeks. Gold, anybody take a stab at it? 80 years. 80 years of gold above ground. Why? That many fillings we need? No. That many, bands? Maybe. It's because gold is money. And it has been for human history. And there's a definite belief and understanding in people that, yes, that's what it is. And none of the other commodities are money. They may be, well, actually silver may come close. We can argue about this, whether it's actually declined as much. Silver is the poor man's gold or the poor man's money. And China was on a silver standard till very recently, and they had enormous quantities of silver. Where is it all gone? I don't think it's all in flat screen TVs, but anyway, time will tell. Another point, there's industrial demand for silver, clear, and there's a deficit in silver, clear, and yet the gold-silver ratio, which historically was 15, 16, 17, is now 50, 60. So gold is worth 50 or 60 times more gold, which is kind of useless, versus silver, which is really good in antiseptics and in film and in whatever. Why? If it was pure supply and demand, that wouldn't be true. It's because gold is money. Now, going back to the Austrian economics, there's a thing called the declining utility of a commodity. Declining utility. So, I like this example. If you're in the Sahara Desert, well, okay, we got 10 minutes to go. Sorry? Okay. Just quickly, the old classical economists did not understand why diamond, which is very useless in effect, is worth ever so much more than, for example, water, which is the stuff of life. How could this be? Well, of course, the value is in the eye of the beholder. But suppose you're in the middle of the Sahara Desert, dying of thirst, and you've got a diamond ring on your finger. Somebody comes along, I'll give you a liter of water. Will you give me the ring for it? In a heartbeat. And suppose, just for argument's sake, somebody comes along, a sharp Arab trader on a camel. You want to buy some water? What will you pay? Whatever you got, because you want to live. So he sells you the water. You take a liter of water. Thank you. I'm saying, want another one? Yeah, I'm pretty thirsty. I'll take another one. Want another one? No, I can't drink it. But you know what? I'll buy the canteen with the water. Oh, okay. Value scale just flipped from water to canteens. Those are now number one in your requirements. So you buy another canteen, and you're soon like with 6 canteens. Well, you want another one? Sell me the camel. I want a camel to carry my stuff. So the values decline quickly. Marginal utility declines. But what did you use to purchase this stuff with? Money. Money is unique. Its marginal utility does not decline. You can never have too much money. You can certainly have too much water, too much of any other commodity. And that's another measure of why gold is money, because its marginal utility declines the slowest, if at all, of any other commodity. So, when you guys invest in gold, you're investing in money. Yes, it's an investment per se, and it's an insurance policy, but it's really money. It's really just accumulating money that has been money for human history, and it'll serve you well, I'm sure. And perhaps silver as well. And in fact, silver may very well do better, quote unquote, because it's quite undervalued relative to gold, historically speaking. So I don't think we have too much time left. Any questions? Be happy to answer them. No? Yes? Maybe? Marcus? There you go. Thank you.
We'll wrap it up and we'll go straight to the conference. Just a second. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Rudy, for that excellent illustration of how a gold-based monetary system can work. Actually, Rudy's written a book which is outside on the table if anyone's interested. It's called Beyond Mises, and it's a very straightforward and easy to follow description of how a gold-based monetary system, with the flexibility that is provided by real bills, which are self-liquidating instruments which mature into gold after 90 days, can function. So if you're interested in reading up about that, then pick up a copy of Rudy's book outside.
Okay. Just give 1 minute. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't have time to get into the real bills. This is one of the things that after World War I, the British tried to resuscitate the gold standard. They didn't try very hard, but they tried. But they did not reinstate the real bills doctrine of Adam Smith, which was the clearing system of the gold standard. Trade, multilateral trade before World War I was so high that it was not till the late 1970s that it was matched. Think about it, almost 100 years. So, yeah, if we have another opportunity to talk about that, we'll do it. In the meantime, yes, the book's available.